God, like
Yeah.
what are you talking about?
Is there in that moment when, we are talking or thinking about the future and we're outside of Morocco and we're thinking, Alhamdulillah, Ola, Inshallah, is there an emotion that, what do you feel in that moment when we're registering, or that program is not the word, because there's a sincerity to it, and when we're programmed, it doesn't sort of include sincerity, but
Right.
is there an emotion attached to these words? And if there is, can you
Oh,
describe it?
sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's almost like a little time capsule. As soon as I vocalize that word inside in my head, it takes me back to Morocco, and how many times we said that every time we were hoping for something to happen in the future, or we were thankful for something, or like the food that was set before us or something like that.
Yeah.
And it just, it makes you mindful. It's kind of a Buddhist thing where it makes you more
Yeah.
mindful of the moment.
Yeah. 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 I mean, how can we say anything about the future really in this unknowable, this sudden world where anything could be?
Right.
And so, yeah, there's a humility that comes with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So where were you born, Mark?
I was actually born in France, Châteauroux, France, and my father was in the Air Force, and so we lived over there for 2 years, and then moved back to the States. And I grew up outside of Philadelphia, out in the suburbs of Philly.
Mm-hmm. And were you in Philadelphia or its suburbs until you went off to college, or how long were
Yeah,
you there?
yeah. I pretty much grew up outside of Philadelphia, same place, same house, and then went to Penn State University and graduated from there in 1982, and that's the year that I joined the Peace Corps and came to Morocco.
What was your major as an undergraduate?
I got a BS in environmental resource management with an emphasis in wildlife management.
And how did you know you wanted to do that? What inspired that major?
Well, I had aspirations to possibly be a veterinarian when I first got into college, until I came to realize that it was going to be too rigorous for my tastes, in terms of the math and science and chemistry and things like that. But I had a keen interest in wildlife and parks and things like that, and protected areas. And so I switched to an environmental resource management degree, which gave me a much more holistic discipline in terms of environmental management.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had aspirations to do wildlife management, which is why I joined the Peace Corps. But at that time, they didn't have any wildlife positions open for volunteers. So I accepted a position as a fisheries volunteer at that time. And it wasn't until midway through my service that I, was able to finish 2 years as a fisheries volunteer, and then was part of the crew that the very first generation of wildlife and parks volunteers in the country.
Well, I mean, your crew had a huge impact on me, but let's back up for a second. Do you still have family in the suburbs of Philadelphia?
Yeah, my mom is still there, and my
Same
cousins
house?
and my uncle, 95-year-old uncle, is still there. Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. Do you go back and visit?
Yeah, once in a while. Yeah, I get back there once in a while. I was just back from my 40th high school reunion a couple of years ago.
Okay. And what does it feel like when you visit? When you go back?
It's a real mixed bag. Definitely a mixed bag of feelings, because a lot of it is very familiar and all, but at the same time, my life out here in the West, I've been out here for 30 years now. So I've lived half of my adult life out here in Arizona. No, actually half of my life. I've lived half of my entire life out here. So, where I came from and where I grew up is becoming less and less relevant to my experience as an adult out here in the Southwest.
I see. I don't know if this is this is definitely a veering off question. And I don't know if but, we hear a lot about Pennsylvania these days in terms of it's sort of like this sort of swing state kind of thing and all of that. Are you familiar with the Pennsylvania state identity? And when we hear in the news that it could go either way, or all of these things, and you having grown up there, do you have a close pulse to that and understand that identity issue, and it could go either way? And if so, can you describe that a little bit? What makes Pennsylvania, or sometimes this or sometimes that, or
well, I think it's not just Pennsylvania. I think it's really true of a lot of states where, you've got large urban populations that don't necessarily have the same political ideologies or views as those people in the rural areas of Pennsylvania. And so Pennsylvania's got some big metropolitan areas with, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh as two major urban anchors. But in between those areas, there are a lot of rural areas and farmland and agricultural land and forest land. And so, the folks that live out in rural areas have a different set of values or political views than those
Yeah,
people who live in the cities.
I see.
And that's true in a lot of states. I mean, it's true here in
Mhm,
Arizona.
mhm. Did you apply to this Peace Corps while you were still in high school?
When
Oh,
I was
I
in
mean, I'm
college.
sorry. I'm sorry. During your last year of college,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hmm.
and do you recall how much time was between your senior year at college and going to joining the Peace Corps?
2 months.
2 months. And did you have options in terms of what country where you could serve, or what was
No, not really. I had applied to become a wildlife volunteer, and they said, "Well, we don't have any of those right now, and we're going to put you in fisheries, and you can either accept it or not." So I accepted it because I did have an agricultural background too, so I figured I could apply that to the fisheries program.
I see.
And
Did they
then,
call you? Were you called with an offer to join? Or
uh, I really can't remember. It's been so long that
do you recall saying yes right away?
Oh
I'll
yeah, yeah, I did. Yeah, I mean, I was pretty committed. No matter, it was actually I had applied for sub-Saharan Africa, and so I do remember that the shift that I had to make was to, and it happened while I was actually still a senior, when I was still matriculating, getting my degree, when they told me that they were going to send me to Morocco. And I thought, Morocco, boy, I'd hardly ever heard of. I'd heard of Morocco, of course, but it sent me right to the library. I went to the library and started looking up as much literature as I could about Morocco, and thought, because I had this vision in my mind that I was going to be in some small African village down in sub-Saharan Africa, Kenya or Tanzania or someplace like that, and working on wildlife projects. But then they said, no, you're going to go to Morocco, and I was like, okay. So it's kind of a mind shift.
hmm Do you recall some of your initial feelings or experiences or thoughts or emotions during those first months in country?
In country, yeah. Well, I didn't get into country until September because I'd had 2.5 really, really rigorous months of training in Norman, Oklahoma, in the fisheries program.
Oh,
And
that's
that was
right.
an experience unto itself. I mean, that was
Yeah,
a whole other story. And
yeah.
but
So
then,
pre-service training used to be stateside until
right,
it became in country.
right, right,
Yeah.
and very intensive
Was that
fisheries.
enjoyable?
No,
W-
it was
w-
it was like boot camp. I mean, it had its own dramas, and the fisheries program was a very rigorous training program, and pretty much under the direction of an autocrat down there, a retired professor who. But nonetheless, it really instilled, as rigorous as it was, and all, it really instilled a sense of self-reliance and being able to figure things out on your own, and institute a really good program once we got here.
Mhm.
And so then I found, what I found was, when I came to do the cross-cultural training, language and cross-cultural training in Morocco, that was actually a piece of cake for myself and one of the other volunteers, um, compared to what we had just been through after 2.5 months in Oklahoma.
Those months in Oklahoma, were you with your exact cohort that was to be with you during your Peace Corps years?
Yeah, two other guys, and then there was also a bunch of other trainees that were going to other countries around the world, like
I see.
Guatemala, Fiji. Um,
I see.
I can't remember all the other countries they were going to, but we
And
had a cohort of about 20. We started out with a lot more people in our group than we ended up with, because a lot of people just left or they got kicked out, and because they weren't cutting it or whatever. And so I think we ended up with like 15 of us altogether, something like that. And
Mhm.
3 of us came over to Morocco.
I see. And then you had cross-cultural training after arriving in Morocco.
Yeah.
And how did you find your way to Toubkal? How did that work?
Well, that's an interesting story. I was in the fisheries program for 2 years, or well, about a year and a half after you discount the training time. But I was in Ouarzazate as a fisheries volunteer for my first round of being a volunteer. And I was in Rabat with our APCD from Peace Corps, visiting with one of the higher ups in the Eaux et Forêts, talking about the fisheries program. And just as we're getting up ready to leave, he said, "Oh, by the way, does Peace Corps have any wildlife volunteers?" And my ears perked right up. He said, "We'd like to start a wildlife and parks program here." His name was Alawi, Mr. Yossef Alawi. I don't know if you remember him. He was a really great guy in Eaux et Forêts. I'm sure he's retired now, and I think he lives over in Saleh. But anyway, our APCD was like, "Oh yeah, well, we could look into that for you." And I was really keenly interested in that. And so I told our APCD, I said, "Look, if you guys get a parks and wildlife program going here, I'll stay." Because, well, that means you have to stay for another 2 years because it's like being a new volunteer. And I said, "No problem, I'll do it." So, I just happened to be at the right place at the right time.
Yeah. It sort of also reminds me about what I feel occurs to many of us in Morocco, and that is that somehow things fall onto us.
Mhm.
Do you find that to be as often the case in Arizona or in Pennsylvania, or what is it about Morocco, or that seems to remind us more often that somehow things come together, Moulana Kabir,
Yeah.
that somehow it works and projects happen and you're in the right place at the right time and all these things? What do you think about that, and what explains that in your mind?
I think about it all the time because for me, it has actually manifested that way. My career has manifested that way multiple times. I can think of 3, 4 opportunities. In fact, including this last, this position that I'm in right now with Cochise County as their environmental projects coordinator, a position that I actually wrote the job description for. And so it's just, I don't know. I think that, if we put a certain amount of psychic energy into creating our destinies and creating that which we really would like to be doing, and helping, especially if it's in the service of others or, contributing to the world in a way,
Yeah.
that it manifests. It just happens. And I've felt very blessed over the years that way. I mean, that's what brought me out to Arizona in the position that I got as working for the Nature Conservancy on a nature preserve. And then, other positions that I've had, my position at the university and this position I have now with the county. So, I think it's just a matter of visualizing in your own mind what it is you'd like to be doing and putting energy into that and having it happen that way.
Do you think, which would say that it's not about physical place or where we are, but more of mindset and internal disposition, and maybe even a little of faith and where we put our energy and our hopes? And so if it's in Arizona, it could manifest there. Or if it's in, New York City or Morocco, it's more about what's going on inside of us rather than where we are.
I think it's a little of both, because place is a really important thing to me. Where I can stay without having to pick up and move my family someplace else. I've wanted to, except for coming to Arizona 30 years ago, that was something that was a big shift, to be able to pick up from Philadelphia and leave my family behind and move out here with a new wife and everything and a new life and, and dive right into a very remote conditions where we were living compared to coming from a very urbanized area. I was living down in Philadelphia and picked up and moved out to a nature preserve that was 25 miles from the nearest town and 15 miles from our mailbox. So it was quite an extreme switch. But having been a Peace Corps volunteer and living in remote conditions there in Woodhagen, that was a big plus in the eyes of the Nature Conservancy when they hired me for that position. So when I told them I'd live for some time without electricity and water up in the mountains of the High Atlas Mountains.
Oh, that's it. You're in.
I said, "Oh, good. Okay. Well, you'll be able to adapt out here just fine."
Yeah. When you think about your second 2 years in the position that you really wanted in your heart, and you served those 2 years in Tasa Wergan?
In Moroccan. Yeah. Well, I lived in Moroccan and
In
worked in
Wergan.
Casa Moroccan. Yeah.
Tuklachmis. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. When you think about those second 2 years, what are you most proud of? When you want to draw strength from the past, and you think of those 2 years, what will you pull from? What will come to your mind?
Well, interestingly, it wasn't anything tangible from the work itself because I felt like I was just treading water in a certain way. We were brand new to the program, and the Jose Ferre didn't have a really good idea of what it is they wanted to accomplish there. They had parks, so it was kind of left up to me to figure out, well, what am I going to concentrate on here? And I chose the reserve, the Takahort, the reserve for the mouflon.
Yeah.
And so I focused all of my studies and my work on that, and trying to create some kind of compatible situation between the folks who lived in Tasa Wergan and the conservation and protection of those mouflon up in the preserve.
Yeah.
But it never manifested that way. And so I was somewhat disappointed as a volunteer in not being able to have some of those ideas manifested. I tried to apply for a grant, a SPA grant, and to set up, interestingly though, to see that that's actually happening in Tasa Wergan now, thanks to you guys and to other folks, where there is an eco lodge there.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Yeah. I mean, well, first of all, was that SPA grant funded?
No, it wasn't. It was funded on my end, but it needed the permission of the local guide, and he wouldn't give it. And that's because Tasa Wergan had a long history of some water dispute with one of the guys in Jose Ferre. So they didn't want to give that little village anything. And so it just, nothing happened.
Yeah. Do you think that, okay, and so did you leave in 1986 disappointed?
I think I left in 1986 ready to go home. After 4 years of being away, I mean, I'd had one break where I came back to the United States between my two stints because I needed some I went to do some wildlife training in the States. So I spent about a month to month and a half or 2 months back in the States before I came back to start my new position.
I see.
But after being, after the 4 years being in Peace Corps, I felt like I was ready to come home.
So you had 2 months or so after graduating from Penn State.
Yeah.
You COS, you close of service in 86, and then you have just another couple months before you start your next job?
Oh, I had another couple months in 86 before I went to grad school.
Before you went to grad school. Did you ever, when you look back on that, did you feel like, one thing to the next, to the next, to the next? I mean, you were just moving right along.
Yeah, but that's, when you're in your 20s like that, in your mid 20s, that feels kind of natural. And in fact, when things started to slow down and I was forced to get a little job to fill in this time before I could get a real job in my field, that's when I felt most frustrated. That's when I was like, I felt like I was being put on hold for the time being until I could actually jumpstart my career, which was with the National Park Service.
Right. And where did you go to graduate school?
I went to Ohio University and got a master's degree in international affairs and African studies.
And so obviously you applied to that program while still in the Peace Corps.
Yeah, and I found out about that program through a couple of other returned Peace Corps volunteers who were backpacking through Morocco.
Yeah, amazing.
They stayed with me up at my place in Woodigan, and spent some time with me. They had just finished up their service in Nepal. I think they had just finished being volunteers in Nepal, and so they told me all about the program. They had done that, and then they came back to Morocco for backpacking or something. They had gone to grad school as they had done this program at Ohio University. And told me all about it and got me excited. And I thought, well, that would be a nice transition thing to do. Rather than just jumping back into the United States and having to live at home or find some place to live.
And that was a 2-year program?
1 year. I did it in 1 year.
And how would you, what do you remember most, or what do you take from most from that year?
That was an incredible year. I mean, it was, kind of readjusting to being back in the United States was one of
Yeah,
those things.
yeah.
But Ohio University had one of the highest concentrations of return Peace Corps volunteers of any university in the
Mm,
country.
mm.
And because of these grants and federal grants that they had for scholarships, plus it had a fantastic, huge population of international students.
I see.
So as a graduate student, I was, rubbing elbows with all kinds of other former volunteers and international students from all over the world. And
I see.
it was a fantastic experience.
Have you been to Ohio before that?
No,
Graduate experience? Have you gone back to Ohio since then?
I haven't been back through there in probably about 30 years. Yeah, it's
I
been a
see.
long time.
I see.
And not that I don't like
No,
it.
I know. I know.
Southeastern
I
Ohio
know.
is beautiful.
Yeah. I went to graduate school at Worcester in Massachusetts at Clark University, and I've never gone prior, and I haven't gone back since.
Yeah.
And, and yet, I have fond memory. I still think about the hot dog place next to the bus station. I mean, this is 25 years ago, and I probably thought about that hot dog place last month.
I was thinking about hot dogs too at the Union Bar in Athens, Ohio. I'd go to for
Yeah,
lunch.
yeah, yeah. And so let me guess, there was 2 months between your graduate school and joining the Forestry Service, or 1 month?
Park
No,
Service?
Park
No,
Service.
that was a very tumultuous time. That was
Well, I'm sorry, but let me ask you, what did you do immediately after graduate school?
I ended up having to move back home because I
Uh,
had no I was out there beating the sidewalks down in Washington D.C., dropping off my resume to development organizations. I wanted to go back overseas. I really hadn't, or I wanted to take advantage of the non-competitive eligibility to get a job with the federal government if I could. And so, I spent quite a bit of time. I was probably about a period of 8 months, I would say 8 or 9 months, and having to move back home. And I had to take up a regular job, working at the mall or something until I could, get,
yeah. So you're an undergraduate at Penn State, where you're living in a world of ideas and free. You
mhm,
go off to Morocco for 4 years, deciding yourself to extend another two. Sort of forging your own fate. From there, your own relationships and fortitude bring you to Ohio, and there you have this international experience that's gratifying,
yeah,
and then you find yourself back home.
back to the banal. Yes.
What describes that emotion?
Oh, it was a rough time. I have to say that was a very, very rough time. There was a lot going on in my family and politics and no, job wise. I had, one of the frustrating things was I had been offered a job with the Park Service. I had gone back and had a connection with one of our former trainers from the wildlife program. I got in touch with him in the Park Service office down in Philadelphia. And he introduced me to the planning division and rivers planning division. And I applied and got interviewed and got offered the job. But like a few days after the job offer, I got a call and said, well, we're going to have to put your offer on hold. There's been a federal hiring freeze.
Uh,
And so that hiring freeze went on for like 6 months. And
mm,
that 6 month period was really rough for me. I was calling
wow.
them up every week. Hey, is the hiring freeze lifted yet? Because I really needed that job. I needed to, get out of my present circumstances. And, my grandfather was ill and dying at that time. And that was a rough
Sorry.
thing.
Mm,
And then by March of 2000, March of 1988, I started my position with the Park Service and have never looked back. So,
yeah.
that was that was like the launching pad right then for my, my
Or
formal career.
yet another launching pad. But what's interesting was you did have your everything lined up, but then there's this hiring freeze which you cannot control, which was national, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
a federal hiring freeze on all new federal positions.
Yeah. I mean, you were so close to,
Yeah.
keeping the stride going.
Yep. Yep.
In fact, you kept the stride going. It's just that something came in the middle that,
Yeah.
that happens. And I guess in some way, if we keep our stride long enough, something's going to happen to break it that we can't quite, that's not of our own doing necessarily.
Right. Right.
So how long were you with the Park Service?
Almost 2 years, just a little under 2 years. And I
where
worked
where was that? I'm sorry.
in the Philadelphia office of it was called the Mid-Atlantic Regional Office of the Park Service. So this office had jurisdiction over all the national parks and monuments and things within the Mid-Atlantic states. But I didn't have anything to do with national parks per se. I was working in the Wild and Scenic River program. And so I was working on a wild and scenic river study in South Jersey for the Great Egg Harbor River, which became the first, because of the work that we put into the communities down there, became the first wild and scenic river in New Jersey, Great Egg Harbor River.
When you look back at those 2 years, I guess two things. One is, what of all the wildlife and preserved areas that you saw is it just in Pennsylvania or is it regional?
No, that office was regional. It was all the Mid-Atlantic states.
Of all the natural wonder that you saw in that region, what place to you is most unforgettable?
In the east, back there?
Yeah, during that period that you just was completely awestruck, or that it left the greatest impression on you in terms of natural beauty?
Well, I would say that the Great Egg Harbor River and its tributaries were a beautiful place. People think of New Jersey as this industrial state and everything, but in South Jersey, it's very rural and can be very wild. You get back on these little rivers and tributaries and canoeing or kayaking, and it was really an amazing place. But the one thing that, what that position did for me was introduced me to a lot of other people in the conservation and environmental world, not just in the Park Service, but in Forest Service and private organizations like the Nature Conservancy. And I got to go to conferences, and I went to one conference, an open space conference out in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Yeah.
And up there, I had read a lot of, while I was a Peace Corps volunteer, I read a lot of Ed Abbey and books about the Southwest, especially Ed Abbey. I loved Edward Abbey. And so when I went to this conference and met other river planners and river folks from all over the country, and I was out there in Albuquerque, I thought I could live out here in the Southwest.
Yeah,
I really like the Southwest.
Yeah, I think that's of course, because I lived 14 years in Albuquerque, and it's kind of like that. You just find it, and you realize, oh my God, it's maybe the only place I miss. Of all the places that I've lived. Do you find Arizona, that feeling that you found in Albuquerque or New Mexico, have you found that same feeling in Arizona?
Oh yeah. Yeah, Arizona and New Mexico are very similar from an environmental standpoint. Politically and culturally, they're quite a bit different. And I've always loved New Mexico, and I loved Arizona too, but I'm just here, I'm in Arizona because of circumstances that brought me here with the Nature Conservancy. I accepted it. Right after Albuquerque, I came back to, Philadelphia with the Park Service and applied for a position with the Nature Conservancy to run a preserve out here in Arizona, a 49,000 acre nature preserve. And I got that position. And so that was an incredible 4 years of my life, working for the Conservancy and even being introduced to more environmental interests. And then, some family circumstances changed and ended up becoming after the Nature Conservancy moved down to a small, very small rural community on the San Pedro River, and, became an environmental consultant. And that's when I met you. When I was an environmental consultant, I came to Morocco to do some training.
What was that, like 1994?
Yeah, 95 and 96. I came back
95.
Twice.
Yes. And I was there the first time you were there. Let me ask you this, and maybe I don't mean to jump too far ahead, but if you would have had the deep, more deeply satisfying Peace Corps experience after those 4 years. Those second 2 years weren't quite the way you would have wanted them. You were ready to go. If there was more, if you left with more works or job satisfaction, work satisfaction, project satisfaction, do you think you would have sought to come back to the extent you did? Do you think you would have wanted to be a farmer-to-farmer volunteer, to find your way back if you would have left fully satisfied?
Oh, yeah, probably so. If I'd been familiar with that kind of program back then, and yeah, I would have come back earlier. I mean, there was things about Morocco that, I was ready to I was ready for a change. I grew a little weary of some of the things in Morocco, and this is really quite the epiphany, or something that was very memorable for me. One of the reasons I left, or was ready to leave Morocco and come back home, was the treatment of women. And I really didn't appreciate the way women were underappreciated and treated in that culture. And so coming back and to the work for the High Atlas Foundation, and see the fantastic work that you guys are doing with women's empowerment trainings, and Fatem Zahra and Ibtisa, and Amina, I was just blown away and so heartened to know that there's an organization like High Atlas Foundation out there pushing for women's empowerment, because that is truly going to be the salvation of our planet, is the education of women and the empowerment of women. And so coming back to that cultural shift, not just from your organization, but I mean, as a country, socially in the country, I'd seen some amazing transformations. I mean, it's not perfect, of course, but just to see those transformations and the differences between now and 30 plus years ago when I was a volunteer has really been very heartening for me.
Mm-hmm. It's I think when I look back at, you were our first, we didn't even know, I think we've heard of Farmer-to-Farmer, but you were the first Farmer-to-Farmer volunteer, and you came with Land O'Lakes, which I believe had a program with Egypt at the time, but were looking for outside potential placements. And so you weren't part of a stream of Farmer-to-Farmer volunteers going to a particular place. You were sort of this one-off that Land O'Lakes was kind enough to fund,
Yeah.
With a destination and a community being in Morocco. And
Right.
you introduced them to us.
Yep.
Which then led to a program where Land O'Lakes supported, I believe, 28 Farmer-to-Farmer volunteers over a course of a year, which then led to where we are now in a 36-month program with 70 volunteers. But you were the catalyst that brought to where we are. I guess, I mean, my question to you is, would you have been happy? Was it important to you to go to Toubkal? Would you have been happy to go anywhere as a farmer-to-farmer volunteer? How did we end up going to where, I mean, the Tasso Oregon area, the Oregon area is important to us. It's in El House province. It's important to you. It seemed, okay, we had things going on, but would you have been as satisfied or as interested if you could have served your farmer-to-farmer experience anywhere in Morocco?
Yeah, I think so, but it wouldn't have the same meaning to me, because I had become familiar with High Atlas Foundation's work back in probably the mid 2000s, through some other folks. And I was checking in on your organization once in a while to see what you're up to. And I was particularly interested in seeing what kind of work had been going on in Tasso Oregon. So when I saw that, I thought, wow, maybe there's an opportunity for me to go back and reconnect, because I didn't feel like my job was complete in Tasso Oregon. I didn't feel like I had accomplished really anything other than relationships. Going back for that training in the mid 90s and touching base with some of the people back in Tasso Oregon 20 some years ago, that really told me that if there was any legacy that I might have left there, it wasn't necessarily the work with the parks or the Mouflon, but it was the relationships that I had built up there. And so it was a privilege for me to come back. I felt, after talking with you, a privilege to come back and actually be able to try to affect some kind of good service or change in Tasselwood again, and help them any way I could. And I felt like I've, been more of a, been able to contribute more in the month that I spent, or 2 months that I spent with you guys in High Atlas Foundation, working with that, under that grant, et cetera, and working with the community, than I was able to accomplish in a year and a half of work as a volunteer there. So it was very satisfying to be able to go back and have a do-over, somewhat to say.
When you've had this, would you call your career self-propelled or self-determined? Did you create the career that you wanted?
Yes, I think I did. I mean, there was maybe a part of it, one part of my career I had to do because of family circumstances, and it was the the one and only available job, and it wasn't the ideal position, but I learned a lot from that. And when I became a county planner, after moving here to Bisbee, I needed a job pretty badly, and so the county hired me as a planner. But in the 10 years that I was with the county, I got to do a lot of environmental planning and do a lot of good for environmental management and water conservation during that time. So I'm proud of that time that I was there. And but if there had been another position that I could have taken back then, I would have. But but at the same time, it set me on a trajectory to doing what I'm doing right now, which I really love. And it also set me on the trajectory that got me back to Morocco and to work with you guys. So things all happen for a reason.
Yeah. When you look back at the arc of your career, there was Peace Corps, and then you're doing other things, graduate school, Park Service, region, and then you come back for those couple stints in 95, 96, and then you go back to your world in Arizona and New Mexico, and then you come back again, another stint, years later. What does Morocco mean when you sort of check in every decade or two? And how does that affect the arc overall?
Well, it has certainly fostered a deep, unabiding love and respect for the people of Morocco and the culture. And it's taken time. It's taken time. Like I said, when I left in 1986, I was growing weary of Morocco and its culture and its treatment of women and things, and then getting injected back there again in the mid 90s to do some training. It was really heartening to see Peace Corps volunteers like yourself who are out there and continuing the program that we had started back in 1985, to see subsequent generations of volunteers doing environmental education and environmental conservation and parks protection, et cetera, in the Peace Corps there. That was really heartening. And to come back and to contribute to that understanding as a trainer was very satisfying. But I don't think anything really cemented my unabiding appreciation of Morocco and its people than my coming back in 2016 and 2017 to work with you guys, Yossef. I mean, that because I felt like I was coming back to something very familiar, like putting on an old pair of shoes you haven't worn for a long time. That's the way I like it, liking it. It's like being able to jump back into speaking Darija again and the culture and all that. I just love that. But at the same time, there were some amazing transformations, cultural and social transformations that have been taking place in Morocco that really just astounded me when I came back in 2016 and 2017.
Yeah. I mean, that's quite anyway, what you just said, believe me, I felt it and I appreciate it. It is, when you look, 5,000 plus people served as Peace Corps volunteers in Morocco, well over 200,000 volunteers around the world. Everyone's their own situation and story, and there's nothing hard and fast to any of it. But if you had to give a message to former Peace Corps volunteers who served in Morocco, and here they have this farmer-to-farmer program a chance to return, what do you think ought to enter their calculus of whether they ought to, consider doing it or not?
Don't hesitate. Do it. Just do it. I had a lot of, I have to tell you, prior to coming back in 2016, you might have remembered when you and I were speaking on the phone, I was wondering if there was going to be the support that, I would need while I was there. Or would I be able to find my way around? Would I be able to make photocopies of something? I was asking you all kinds of small, trivial questions because I had a lot of trepidation about coming back.
Yeah.
I really did. I didn't have a lot of confidence that I would be able to hack it again. And, that I would be jumping back into the Moroccan soup and kind of not finding my way around or being, a bit fearful about moving around the city and things like that. And, all of that trepidation and anxiety just vaporized the minute that Hassan and Saeed picked me up in the cab, in the car at the airport.
Yeah.
And literally the minute they picked me up and we started bantering back and forth from the ride from the airport to the hotel,
Yeah.
I felt like, okay, I'm home again, no problem. This is going to be great.
That's really, really nice. Really nice. So we're 45 minutes in and we're going to, we're going to wind down now, but do you have any career regrets? Do you ever wish?
No.
None? Looking back
Nope.
at your professional life, none?
No, none whatsoever. I'm in the twilight of my career right now. I retired in the state system from the University of Arizona as an extension agent, which I did for 12 years as a community educator in sustainable development and sustainability and land use planning. And it was a satisfying career, but it started to feel a little bit stagnant towards the end there. So I got a call from Cochise County, who I used to work for before, and they wanted me to come back and to help manage these environmental projects, the aquifer recharge projects that will help sustain flows in the San Pedro River. And yet they didn't have a really good idea of what I could do. So I wrote the job description for that. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is the culmination of my career right now. It's it's like coming back full circle, being able to, serve as a steward of the lands that the county now owns and the projects that we're working on, and establishing trails and more open space and things like that I feel like I've come full circle in my environmental career. So this will probably be the last position I have before I retire for good.
Yeah. I want to mention, I didn't know that when you left after 4 years, the discomfort that you saw how women and girls can be treated was a real motivating factor to sort of move on and get a little distance between you and Morocco. And that's given, but when I look to the context, you ended up writing an article as a result of your farmer-to-farmer experience, which focused on that.
Yeah. And trees.
And
women and trees.
But it was, it was sort of an unequivocal, empowerment is the solution, not just not just a solution for gender inequality and justice, but solution for our entire world's sustainability.
Right. And I still truly believe that.
Yeah. But I find that also, you were talking about closure, but to what extent did that article address the kind of closure that perhaps you needed to feel, or that motivation of leaving after 4 years and then writing an article with such, absolute, unequivocation on that point, and it being true, of course, but what did that article mean to you?
It meant the world to me, because it was kind of an epiphany in my own mind after my experience with High Atlas Foundation, to see those two foci, those 2 points, those 2 target areas of your organization of empowering women and planting trees, And it seems like an oversimplified concept, but it's not when you really think about it. To me, I did a lot of deep thinking about it and thought, these really are this is going to be the salvation of our planet, as empowering women and planting trees. And where they overlap, even better yet, like the women's nursery cooperative you have going in Tasselwerd again.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I just,
Oh my God.
and it's not just, it was closure for me because it brought a lot of satisfaction in knowing that you, as the leader of this organization, and all of the people, the great staff and volunteers that have come through this, also recognize that. And that it's also been recognized around the world in other development organizations, that empowering women is really the key to the salvation of our planet and our society as a whole. And so to be able to articulate that in that article was cathartic, it was somewhat cathartic for me, and satisfying knowing that there's lots of other folks who are on the same page of music.
Yeah, it's just, I think we'll conclude, if it's okay, Mark, on this point, and just if you can have one final reflection on this one point. We had said earlier in our conversation about how Morocco reminds us that Moulana Kabir, because things happen and it's not in our control, but somehow things come together. And when I think that for all these decades, you've been carrying this of, environment and women's empowerment, and yet your farmer-to-farmer experience resulted in a complete embodiment of that, a tree nursery managed by teenage girls who were denied secondary school, who had education, cut short, and yet have decided but yet organized, created this cooperative, and now manage a nursery, which was funded by the analysis and the writing and the work that you did in that proposal that went to UNDP. But I just want to say that there's no way that we could have planned that better. There's no way we could plan that even. I mean, all we could do is try and take these steps, but it's beyond even poetic justice. It's like, how could that be that the work that you stood for is manifested decades later? Because of you.
I know. It just goes to show you that things happen with time, I guess. Time, it takes time. It takes time.
Oh,
what's the Yiddish word for that kind of destiny? Or not kismet, it's something, there's something like that. What is the
there must be.
I can't remember. Somebody taught me that word, and that word describes it perfectly. That it's kind of like manifest and destiny for this to happen. It was bound to happen.
Yeah, but when I think of all the things that have taken time, all the different nursery partnerships and all the different programs, and the women's empowerment approach that you're referring to, that our team, Fatima Zahra, Amina, Ibtisam, Sana, all of our team, and now it's an empowerment approach that Saeed and Rashid work with men to bring into their lives. And but when I think of all the years and years and years, to be able to say there is a methodology, or that there's, it's we're both
Shebeni.
I guess. And I'm going on, but okay, reflect on this final point, Mark. How do we deal with the tiredness and the heaviness that comes with all the time required in order for these things to manifest and to make real? How do we work through the endless energy over our entire lives to make these things real?
Yossef, that's a question that I got to be asking you, because for me, I had all these different things happen in my life, and these different career shifts and all that just by chance happened to bring me back on sabbatical to volunteer with High Atlas Foundation through the Farmer-to-Farmer program in 2016. That I think by chance and destiny that happened, but I had a lot in between. But for you, that's the question I would like to ask you. How do you do it? Because you're the one who's been plugging at the same thing for many decades now. And how do you do it? I mean, how do you keep plugging away?
Go ahead.
Your people. I think probably one part of that answer is, the people the very talented and high caliber folks that you get working for you and motivated, and you are, you're a great instigator that way. And I know the people that I've having seen it firsthand, how dedicated your staff is and the volunteers, and that's remarkable and wonderful.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess on another level, just how we were saying how things somehow come together and we can't quite explain it. I sometimes, if I do in a quiet moment, ask myself that question. I really don't necessarily have an answer. I mean, people are beautiful. And then I would think to myself, okay, the people, but also the people are beautiful in New York City, and the people are beautiful in the Philadelphia suburb, and in Brisbane, and in Albuquerque.
Yeah.
And, and so is it the people, and is it the place, and so in the end, I just come to this point that I can't quite explain it. I do believe in Morocco, and I do believe that Morocco's success will lead toward a continental success, that Morocco can be a light unto others, and that because it's dedicated to women's empowerment and people's participation and localizing control and South-South unity and multiculturalism and all these good things, but even then, is that really the answer? So, I don't know. I really don't know, but I just hope somehow, we can keep it going, I guess. Inshallah. All right. So if anyone is out there, I don't know, but I hope that you've enjoyed the sharing of Mark Apel's experience.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
We do have some questions actually from viewers. If you guys don't mind answering them.
Yes, go ahead. Okay.
So many hellos to both of you. Greetings from Ramzi Talbi. There is also Abdullah Talib Ali. So saying hi to Mark.
Alaikum salam.
Yeah, and then we have Ben Dahman. Also, he appreciates the work you've done in Morocco. And there is Amanda Schumann, and she's asking a question about women. And she was asking if there were any Peace Corps women back then when you were serving in '85. Were they female Peace Corps volunteers, and how were they at the time?
There definitely were women volunteers, and a lot of them were in the Teaching English TEFL program, the Teaching English program, or they were working with some of these schools with kids with disabilities. And they were doing some really powerful work, really great work. But it really was tough for them as volunteers, female volunteers at that time. They had to have some really good allies, either, with their fellow teachers or just other Peace Corps volunteers in the town with them. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy being a woman. It was much easier for men being Peace Corps volunteers at that time in Morocco than it was for women.
Yeah, I remember during our years, I think there were 70 Peace Corps volunteers and 8 or 9 were men. So we were like, primarily women. And I often wonder if I would be here in Morocco after all these years, if I were a woman, because of all the entirely different existence and experience I would have had, and if I could endure, what women experience, international women experience for all these years I've been here. And I'm doubtful that I probably would not have been here if I were a woman, having to deal with so much more and all the discomfort that could come with, a gender imbalance or unfair or unjust. How much can one endure of that? And so,
right.
Anyway, but in our group, we were primarily women.
2 more things. There is a Rashid who's asking you guys to speak some Darija towards the end of your live. And then from me, I would like Mark to give us like a closing comment for all the super returned Peace Corps volunteers back home who might consider coming back to Morocco to serve with us as a farmer-to-farmer volunteer?
I would say if they have a break in their career or a lull, or they're just wondering, what could they do next? I think that coming back and contributing through the Farmer-to-Farmer program with the High Atlas Foundation would be a wonderful thing for them to do. It's very painless, fairly painless, and all your expenses are covered, and you don't have to be a farmer to be a part of the Farmer-to-Farmer program. The Farmer-to-Farmer program embodies a lot more than just playing around in the dirt kind of agricultural technical training. It's much more than that, and I came back and was able to do assessments of sustainability indicators and interviews with women. I mean, it provided me opportunities that I never had when I was a volunteer. And I think one of those wonderful opportunities was to actually sit down out in the field and down and also in Orica to sit with the women's cooperative there and ask questions and have them to be open and feel free to be able to say what they wanted to say about the programs. That was just an incredible experience for me personally as a volunteer who never got to really, when I was a volunteer, never got to talk to women that way or to, have conversations with women that way. And it was a wonderful experience. So I would highly encourage any returned Peace Corps volunteers from Morocco to apply to the Farmer-to-Farmer program and see how they can contribute to the High Atlas Foundation, because it's a great organization and doing some great things around the country. Picking up from where you left off, basically, is the motto, I guess I would come up with.
Yeah. And somehow, and bring a great, hopefully a good fruition that fulfills one's arc, Morocco's arc.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're going to leave it at that. Shall we?
Darija, please.
علاش ما يحضر بالعربية درجة أحسن لك اللي كان حضر بالإنجليزية.
أنا غادي نقول المتتعاون ديال حياة سلام أمريكية حنا في المغرب كنستناو عليكم وبغيناكم ومرحبا بكم.
مرحبا بكم.
So thank you Moulay Hassan for